Most people who become millionaires through business ownership never build anything you'd recognize from a pitch competition. No app, no brand deal, no viral product drop. A striking share of them own something closer to a car wash, a handful of vending machines, or a block of storage units nobody drives past twice. Looking across business survival data by category, a few of these unglamorous categories post success rates north of 90%, while the exciting startup everyone actually wants to talk about at a barbecue fails within its first few years far more often than it survives. What follows is 6 of those categories, in the order they tend to actually get built by people who stumble into this path. The 3-part test that separates a good one from a bad one, and the specific month each piece of income started to matter. None of this is exciting to describe. That's the entire mechanism. You are 29 years old, a shift supervisor at a regional warehouse, bringing home $3,150 a month after tax, and your entire net worth is a 14-year-old pickup truck with a cracked windshield and $612 sitting in a savings account you haven't touched in months because there's nothing left over to add to it. You've already tried the versions of getting ahead that look good in a screenshot, an NFT project that cost you $900 and returned exactly nothing, a phone case dropshipping store that generated 4 total sales in 3 months, 2 of which were refunded, a fitness coaching Instagram page you posted to religiously for half a year that never once converted a follower into an actual paying client. Every attempt shared the same shape, a burst of initial excitement, a complicated setup, and no reliable date each month when money actually showed up. The turn happens on a slow Tuesday, during a stretch of mandatory overtime, half listening to a podcast episode about how self-made wealth actually gets built, when the host mentions almost offhandedly that most people with real, quiet net worth aren't running anything glamorous. They're running unremarkable, necessary services that never make anyone's highlight reel. It irritates you at first, honestly. You've spent a year chasing clever ideas, and the suggestion is basically to stop being clever and start being useful in a boring, repeatable way. You decide, mostly because nothing else has worked, to actually test that idea against your own life instead of dismissing it. It doesn't help that you can still picture, in uncomfortable detail, exactly how each of the previous attempts died. The NFT project didn't fail because the idea was bad. It failed because you never once understood what you were actually selling, only that other people seemed to be making money doing something similar. The phone case store died a slower death. 4 sales over 3 months, 2 refunded, a Shopify subscription you kept paying for out of stubbornness for 2 more months after you'd basically given up on it. The fitness page was the one that stung the most, honestly, because it required real effort. Filming, editing, posting on a schedule you actually kept. And it still produced nothing you could point to as income. What all 3 had in common looking back wasn't that they were bad ideas exactly. It was that none of them had a customer who was already looking for what you were offering. You were trying to create demand out of nothing, over and over, instead of finding demand that already existed, and simply showing up for it. Over the next several months, you fall into research the way other people fall into a new hobby. Small business marketplaces, old interviews with unremarkable local operators, forum threads full of people describing income nobody would ever ask them about at a party. 6 categories keep resurfacing no matter which direction you look. This is where the actual path starts, category by category, in roughly the order they show up in your own story. The first boring business is car washes, not the automated tunnel operations lining the highway, just a plain self-serve or basic service wash on a corner lot. The appeal is almost embarrassingly simple, once you look past how unglamorous it sounds. You install equipment once, pumps, brushes, vacuums, a payment terminal, and then let ordinary traffic do the rest of the work indefinitely. You find a small 4-bay wash for sale on the edge of your town, owned by a woman named Rosalind, who's run it for 11 years, and is finally ready to retire closer to her grandchildren. The listing price is $274,000, with claimed net income around $58,000 a year, which is real, but still well beyond what you can write a check for on your own. You structure the deal the only way that's actually available to you. A $19,500 down payment, most of it from selling the pickup and buying something cheaper and less sentimental. The rest from a small personal loan you're nervous about the entire time you're signing for it. Rosalind agrees to carry a seller finance note over 6 years, on the condition you keep her one long-time part-time attendant on staff. Month 1 is not impressive by any measure. Gross revenue of $6,140, and after utilities, the note payment, insurance, and the attendant's hours, you take home $890. It's not much. It's also the first money you've ever made that didn't require you to physically be somewhere for another hour of your life. By month 6, after fixing a chronically broken vacuum station and adding a simple loyalty punch card, monthly take-home climbs to $1,540. The second boring business is property management, and you find it almost by accident, through Rosalind's landlord, an older man named Denholm, who owns the strip mall the car wash sits in, and mentions, almost as a throwaway comment, that he's exhausted from managing 4 other rental properties on top of it. You offer, mostly out of curiosity, to take a few tasks off his plate for a flat monthly fee. Within 2 months, word spreads through his small circle of landlord friends, and you're managing 22 rental doors across town, collecting rent, coordinating repairs, handling the paperwork nobody wants to deal with at 10 at night. At an average fee of $85 per door, that's $1,870 in gross monthly fees, and after paying a part-time assistant to help with scheduling, your net from property management alone settles around $1,240 a month. Combined with the car wash, your outside income is now past $2,700 a month, on top of a warehouse salary that hasn't moved a single dollar since you started this whole experiment. The third boring business is vending routes, and this one starts because you notice, while doing a walkthrough of one of Denholm's buildings, that the ancient vending machine in the lobby is somehow always half empty, despite looking like nobody's touched it in years. You track down the operator, a semi-retired man looking to offload his remaining machines, and buy 3 of them outright for $4,150 total. You place 2 in buildings you already manage, and 1 in the car wash's small waiting area, where customers are standing around anyway, with nothing to do but wait for their vehicle. Vending is without question the least interesting business on this list. You drive a short loop, refill, collect, repeat. By month 4, the 3 machines together clear $780 a month in profit after restocking and fuel. By month 10, after swapping out slow-selling items and adding a 4th machine at a nearby auto shop, the route settles at a steady $1,310 a month. The 4th boring business is pest control, and it enters your life through a conversation with one of your property management tenants, who mentions offhandedly that she can never get her regular pest technician to actually show up on schedule. You start asking around and discover the technician is planning to retire within the year and has no one lined up to take over his existing client route. You buy the route outright for $11,000, his equipment, his client list, and 3 months of him training you on the technical side of the job you know nothing about. The route covers 64 homes paying $54 a month each, which works out to roughly $3,456 in gross monthly revenue from a single technician, you driving a single truck. After chemical costs, fuel, and the note payment on the route purchase, your net from pest control alone lands around $1,890 a month within the first year. At this point, your combined outside income across 4 small, unglamorous businesses is clearing roughly $5,900 a month, more than your warehouse job pays you before tax. None of it happens as smoothly as it sounds when you compress a year into a few sentences. Somewhere around month 14, 2 of the car wash's vacuum stations fail in the same week, right as one of Denholm's tenants stops paying rent entirely and disappears without a forwarding address. And you spend 3 straight weekends splitting time between filing a small claims eviction and driving to a parts supplier 40 minutes away because the closer one is out of stock. There's a stretch of about 6 weeks where the pest control route alone eats every spare hour you have outside the warehouse job, because 2 technicians you'd hope to eventually hire both fall through at the interview stage. And you're the one climbing into crawl spaces at 6 in the morning before your regular shift starts at 9. None of this shows up in a monthly profit number. It's the part nobody puts in the summary, and it's also the part that quietly filters out almost everyone who hears boring business and pictures something that runs itself from day one. It doesn't. It runs itself eventually, after you've personally absorbed the parts that don't yet have a system built around them. What gets you through that stretch isn't motivation in any dramatic sense. It's the fact that even during the worst 6 weeks, the deposits still land. The car wash still takes in cash from strangers who don't know or care that a vacuum station is broken, as long as one of the four still works. The pest control clients still pay their $54 whether or not you personally feel like showing up that particular morning, because the invoice goes out automatically and the service, however exhausted you are delivering it, still gets delivered. That's the actual advantage these businesses have over almost everything else you tried before. Not that they're easier in the moment, but that the income doesn't evaporate the instant your energy dips, the way a dropshipping store or a coaching page does the second you stop actively promoting it. Something shifts in how you think about all of this. You stop treating each business as its own separate idea and start noticing that the actual pattern sitting underneath all four mattered far more than any single one of them individually. Before that pattern gets explained properly, it's worth finishing the last two categories, because understanding all six is what eventually teaches you how to choose well, even though you only end up building four of them yourself. The fifth boring business is laundromats. You almost dismiss the category outright, assuming nobody under 40 still uses one in a world full of in-unit machines. Then you actually drive past a few in the older part of town and watch the parking lots fill up every single evening. Renters without hookups, families hauling in oversized comforters twice a year, college students without the patience to own their own machine. The pattern underneath it is identical to everything else on this list. People need clean clothes weekly, they pay in small increments, and they return without you ever needing to remind them. You never end up buying one yourself, but you study several listings closely enough to understand the mechanics. One aging laundromat you look at is priced at $165,000 with net income around $3,900 a month, financed in the same seller carry structure Rosalind used with the car wash. You simply run out of bandwidth to add a fifth business on top of the four you're already running solo. The sixth boring business is self-storage. And this is the category that intimidates you most from a distance, mostly because of scale rather than concept. The psychology underneath it is almost unreasonably reliable. Once someone puts boxes, furniture, or old inventory into a rented unit, they keep paying for it long after they meant to clear it out, telling themselves every single month that this is the month they'll finally deal with it. That month rarely comes. You don't end up building one, but you research a local partnership model closely enough to see how it typically works. An operator funds a minority share of construction costs in exchange for running all day-to-day operations, while a landowner contributes the property itself. You file the idea away as the next logical step, once your existing four businesses are stable enough to free up both cash and attention. You don't build all six, you build four: the car wash, property management, vending, and pest control. But seeing all six clearly is what actually teaches you the lesson underneath them, which is that the specific business mattered far less than a shared pattern running through every one of them. Here's the part worth sitting with, because it's the actual mechanism rather than just a motivational aside. Research into self-made wealth consistently finds that a large share of millionaires are business owners, and a disproportionate number of them run companies that would never come up if you ask someone to name an exciting industry. Without necessarily articulating it this way themselves, they tend to be running the same three-part test on every decision, whether or not they'd ever call it that. The first test: does the customer's need repeat on its own without you having to manufacture urgency? A car needs washing again, a property needs managing again next month, and the month after that. A pest problem doesn't resolve itself after one visit. None of these businesses require you to convince anyone they need the service. The need was already there before you showed up. The second test: is the individual purchase small enough that nobody has to think hard about it? Nobody schedules a family discussion to approve an $85 property management fee split across a landlord's rent roll, or a $12 car wash, or a $54 monthly pest visit. The price sits comfortably below the point where people deliberate, which makes the revenue far steadier than anything depending on a considered high-stakes decision. The third test: can you eventually own or control the asset generating the income, rather than just renting access to someone else's? The car wash bays and equipment, the client list and route for pest control, the rental relationships and management contracts, even the vending machines themselves. This is the test that actually compounds over years rather than months, because it's the difference between income that depends on you personally showing up forever and an asset that has value independent of your continued involvement. Once you can see all three tests clearly, The question changes from what business sounds impressive to what unglamorous, already proven business in your own area passes these three filters and happens to have an owner who's tired and ready to sell. From there, the actual numbers mostly speak for themselves without needing to be dressed up. At 29, your net worth barely existed in any meaningful sense. By 36, after roughly 7 years of accumulating one unremarkable business at a time, the picture looks nothing like where you started. You still drive a used vehicle. You still shop the same way you always have, but the car wash note is fully paid off, and a recent appraisal puts that business alone somewhere around $310,000. Your property management contracts, valued at a standard multiple of annual fees, are worth roughly $94,000 if you ever chose to sell the book of business. The pest control route, similarly valued against comparable route sales, would likely fetch close to $71,000. Combine all of that with retained cash you mostly parked in simple index funds, rather than anything requiring active attention, and your net worth crosses $1.2 million sometime during your 36th year, without a single dramatic headline moment attached to any of it. Just 4 unremarkable income streams, compounding quietly against each other for 7 straight years. None of this requires you to copy the exact mix of a car wash, a property management book, a vending route, and a pest control route. What actually transfers is the underlying discipline sitting beneath all 4 choices. You don't need an idea nobody's heard of. You need a proven, repeat demand service with a low drama price point and an asset you can eventually own outright. That's the entire search. It's not a secret, and it was never hidden. It's simply unglamorous enough that almost nobody bothers looking for it on purpose, which is exactly why it keeps working for the people who do. The actual first move isn't complicated, even if it doesn't feel dramatic enough to be worth doing. It's an afternoon spent looking at real business for sale listings in your own area instead of scrolling past them. Not online storefronts with no operating history, but physical services that have already survived several years of ordinary Tuesdays. A car wash, a handful of rental properties whose landlord sounds exhausted on the phone. A pest control technician one conversation away from mentioning he's ready to retire. Run whatever you find through the same 3 questions this entire path rests on. Does the need repeat without being manufactured? Is the purchase small enough to skip deliberation? Can you eventually own the thing producing the income rather than just renting access to it every month? If the answer to all 3 is yes, you've likely found something worth a serious look, even if it's the kind of business you'd never bring up first at a dinner party. It also helps to be honest with yourself about the version of this that doesn't get talked about as often. The 6 weeks of broken vacuum stations and disappearing tenants and crawl spaces at 6 in the morning aren't a sign you picked the wrong business. They're closer to a toll you pay once, early, before the systems and the extra set of hands exist to absorb that kind of week without it landing entirely on you. Most people who try this and quit don't quit because the math stopped working. They quit somewhere in the middle of a bad month, convinced the friction is permanent, when it's usually just the part that happens before you've had enough repetitions to build a buffer. The businesses on this list don't reward cleverness. They reward whoever's still standing in month 14, still refilling the vending machine, still driving the same pest control loop, long after the initial motivation that got them started has worn off completely. That quiet, undramatic ordinariness isn't a flaw in the plan. It's the entire reason the plan tends to actually work.